And we'd like to welcome you back to yet another episode of the Outside 50 podcast presented by US Footy News. I'm Rick Shaibani alongside Cilke and Ben Martinez. How you guys doing?
Great, Rick. How's it going?
Doing well.
Pretty good over here as well. Yeah, we've got a very special guest today, another international guest, but this one does have some US footy connections, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But without further ado, Paddy Smallwood from the Bogota Bulldogs.
G'day, guys. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
G'day, Paddy. Thanks for making it on.
Yeah, thanks for making it on, Paddy.
Yeah, this was kind of a a series of fortunate events that we were able to get you on. Obviously, you guys have a connection with the Denver Bulldogs. You guys played them a couple years ago in what was a historic match, first ever game between a North American footy side and a South American footy side. I think a lot of us are wondering how that came about, and are there any plans to potentially do things like this again in the future?
Yeah, look, it came about. I probably need to correct it. In the end, Austin actually came down just before Denver, so Austin stole the cake with that one.
Thanks there, Paddy.
Yeah, no, I thought I'd throw that in, Ben. Look, basically, in Melbourne, I went to school with probably my best mate, Jez O'Connell, who is the vice president at Denver, and we sort of, had discussions about bringing the Denver Bulldogs down to Bogota for a couple of years, effectively, and I sort of, never really thought there was actual movement behind that talk. But Jez is a pretty cool guy and a pretty motivated guy, and all of a sudden he rang me up one day and said, "We've got a team coming down in a few months." So that was pretty special for us. And yeah, they got organised, and then it was funny. A few weeks after that, basically, Austin sort of contacted us and said, "Yeah, we're going to come down in April." And for us, it was heaven to have two US teams come down in the space of a couple of months. Was reward for 5 years of work down here in Bogota building footy. So it was fantastic.
Absolutely. That's a unique opportunity you guys have had. And I remember talking on a previous podcast to Dallas McCulloch, who is part of the Hawaii Footy Club out here. And obviously they're in a really isolated position and flights are expensive. So they're always trying to coax teams to come there. And, they're just like, oh, even if it's just a few guys, we'll have a run, we'll have a kick, because they're in a unique position. And obviously in Bogota, most people wouldn't even know they had footy at all. And now everyone's like, oh, wow, they're hosting international teams over there. So that's an exciting development. And yeah, good on you for doing that.
Yeah, look, it's I've been looking at how Hawaii have actually been going about it, and yeah, they're in quite a similar situation to us, and it is about inviting. For us, it's about bringing teams to Colombia, not just for footy, but the cultural experience of coming to this country also. We think's a great ticket, and what we did with Austin and Denver effectively was try and create a package where effectively all they had to do was buy their plane tickets, and they get off the plane, we look after them, show them Colombia without obviously babysitting them, but show them Colombia, have everything organized for them. They can just come and relax and enjoy the experience of coming down here. So we think it's a great ticket, and that's what we're trying to sell, and it's fantastic that it seems like the club's really enjoyed it, and we're hearing great reports when they went back. So
Excellent, Paddy. And if you can give us some insight and give the listeners some insight as well on your journey. So you grew up in Melbourne, is that correct?
I grew up east of Melbourne. I grew up in Gippsland region, which East Gippsland to be exact. So it's about four hours east of Melbourne in a town called Bairnsdale.
Yep. No, I know it. Beautiful part of Victoria there. So
yeah, fantastic.
So what brought you to Colombia? Walk us through that story.
I sort of after leaving Gippsland, I did my school in Melbourne and sort of moved into as an electrician in Melbourne for a few years, and got a bit wanted to see the world effectively. So I took off to Europe for about a year of backpacking around Europe. Came back and I wasn't satisfied. So I took off again and did effectively 2 years of backpacking around South America, and effectively ended up in Colombia and spent a year in Colombia and just found it the most fantastic place. This is about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and stayed here for a year and loved it. Had to go home at some point again to work, but the plan was always to move back here. I'd met my future wife at that point already, and yeah, about 5 years ago now, I moved back on a permanent basis and been here ever since.
That's a pretty unique journey. And what specifically, like, how did you get involved with the Bulldogs down there? Obviously, footy's in your blood, and I'm sure you were keen to, once you got settled, get involved with the team. But how big were the Bulldogs back then? And how was how easy or how difficult was it to get involved with them and start competing again?
Uh, Competing at 2,500 meters is difficult. So I'll put that forward straight away. I'm sure Denver's got a little bit of an idea about that.
Yeah.
Basically, the club didn't exist, so we sort of had an informal kick with a few Aussies that had met, I think, towards the end of 2015. And a few mates just organised a kick in the park, and 20 people turned up, and we just went, "Wow, this is pretty special." And we're stunned because not many of us really knew there were that many Australians in the city, to be honest. So we organised a kick for the week after, and that just sort of snowballed a bit. And so yeah, for the remainder of that, I think we had our first game in late November, like an intra sort of game between about 20 people, and it was brilliant. And basically after that, the team from Santiago in Chile agreed to come up and play us the following year. And from that point on, we decided we needed to form a committee, which effectively formed the club at the beginning of 2016. And from that moment on, the Bulldogs juggernaut just sort of rolled and rolled and rolled, and it's been an unbelievable journey. So to be a founding member of it, I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 of us left in Bogota who really found the club. It's been a pretty spectacular journey for us.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. And you mentioned just now that like there aren't that many Aussies in Bogota, but a lot of people might not know that it is a pretty multicultural city. So what's like the mix of nationalities and people that you get coming down to training every week?
Yeah, well, we were pretty focused from the beginning to make sure it didn't turn into a bit of an expats club, a bit of an Australian centric environment. So we from the beginning we focused on recruiting Colombians for a start, bringing friends down kind of situation. We got a lot of people from the English soccer boys come down, a few Irish fellas, a few Dutch people came down, and it just turned into a real multicultural, sort of melting pot within the club of 8, 9 different countries at a time represented within the club. And for the Colombian players, that was awesome. They get to really mingle with different cultures and different people. The Australians effectively, I guess, ran the culture of the club as such, and was organising the events and organising the club. But the input from across the planet effectively was really made for a good place to be at the club, which we're still trying to upkeep now effectively.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you guys have a slogan, from a kick to a club, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people can really get behind that. I love that slogan. I think it's awesome. You guys have been around for about 5 years now, and actually the Lady Bulldogs were the first international match, Rick, and I think that was the one where instead of Austin may have gotten the men, but the Lady Bulldogs were technically the first
Absolutely.
women's match. So now you have 3 essential teams going on, and it says on your website that you have now at 22 women from just last year. So how are you guys? You just talked a little bit briefly about recruitment a little bit. How are you incorporating recruitment and fielding that for being such a small country and getting women involved as well? That's amazing. Some U.S. clubs can't even do that.
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, the women, yeah, you're correct. That was definitely the first international women's game in Colombia, and it was a brilliant event. We made that the showpiece event after the men's game against Denver, and it was fantastic. We had a couple of hundred people standing around the ground watching the girls really go at it, and Bogota won. I just want to put that in there. Look, basically, recruitment's been a really interesting and challenging aspect of what we're trying to do here in Colombia. In terms of, I guess, the women, we talked for a couple of years about how we get women involved in the club and how we can get girls who want to play footy coming from a country where there's no real contact sports in Colombia, men and women. However, we got a little bit lucky that rugby took off here. Must have been 6 or 7 years ago, rugby union. So the girls' rugby, I think there's up to 40,000 registered players in Colombia now playing rugby. So we ended up sort of going on a bit of a poaching campaign, to be fair, and trying to get the girls across from rugby. And they came across in their skills, and their attack on the ball was, I mean, second to none. And we were terrified at first and very excited pretty soon after. So yeah, basically the girls evolved themselves to a certain point where they just recruited friend after friend after friend, and all of a sudden we had 20 girls on our hand running around kicking Aussie Rules footy. So that was pretty special on that aspect. With the men as such, it's been probably more challenging, to be honest. Again, there's no contact sport in this country to really, have them used to. I guess in the United States you have American football, and there's that little growing up with contact. Whereas here it's soccer, and if you've watched South American soccer, they don't take bumps too well. So basically, we worked with a foundation here called Buen Punto, and they're teaching value through sport to underprivileged children and children without parents. Effectively, I don't like to use the term, but orphanage, but not quite the same, but something similar. And we came in as a third pillar of that. They do rugby and surfing, and they go around the country and teach that to underprivileged children. So we jumped in, got some great funding from DFAT in Australia, and joined that, and effectively recruited. We've probably had 20 or 30 Colombians from that organisation come through the club, and maybe we've got 15 who have stuck fast and are still at the club. And from those original Colombians, friend after friend has been recruited, and now we have twice as many Colombians as part of the club as Australians.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal initiative, like, not just in terms of getting new players, but giving back to the community. I always say that sports are always the great equalizer because, rich, poor, doesn't matter. All that matters is whether you can play or not. So it's really cool that you guys are able to connect with the community in terms of just giving people a chance to have a go.
Yeah, look, and it goes back to what I was saying about not wanting to be an expat hub and just a group of expats. There's a few sports here that you can find that in. I find, without being, insulting, I find cricket's a bit more of an expat kind of a situation, because as a Colombian, if you come down, you don't know how to do it. You go in, you bat for one ball, get out, and get carted around the park bowling. Whereas footy, we just, from the beginning, we thought the only way this club's going to succeed and to survive is to get Colombians involved. And it's challenging. It really is. There's no Aussie Rules on television here. ESPN doesn't play the games. So trying to get a group of Colombians to play a sport they've never seen before in their life, still basically find it difficult to watch. No Spanish commentary. Yeah, it's been a challenge.
That's tough. Yeah. kind of piggybacking off of that, like, I'm sure it's a nightmare just trying to reserve a field because I can imagine that the mentality there is like, "Oh, if it's not soccer, don't bother with it," you know? So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's been absolutely one of our biggest challenges is finding the space. In a city of 10 million people, most of the kids here grow up playing soccer on tiny little concrete pitches in amongst their apartment buildings, and for us to find spaces has been at times a nightmare. And when you do get the chance to book soccer fields, which effectively we need to play on, then you have those other challenges that come in, which is Latin time, for example. So you book a field from 2 o'clock, and the Colombians turn up at 3, and these sort of things. It's funny, and if you can't laugh at it, it'd be a nightmare. But we find a way, and end of the day, look at it's space and ground size is the biggest, arguably the biggest problem we have here.
Paddy, just to speak to the other challenge you mentioned there as well around growing exposure of the game, locally there. I mean, you think of Colombia and you're talking about a country, a nation that ranked top 10 in the FIFA World Rankings. They've been quarterfinalists in the FIFA World Cup. They live and breathe soccer. It's a religion. And to speak to what you said there, to take, almost harness that passion, that love that they have for soccer and introduce a new sport that they've never seen before, that must be challenging. But how have you found the Colombians generally, getting intrigued, getting interested in making that jump over or learning about the game?
Look, I guess the most rewarding aspect of what we're doing down here and the work we've put in is that it's exactly that, watching people grow a love for a sport they've never grown up with, and have a passion for a sport most of them had never seen before, and played 4 or 5 games with us before they'd even watched an AFL game. But they grow the love for it, and it sort of, I don't know how to put it, but it brings like a self satisfaction that I grew up believing this was the greatest game on the planet, and to see them play it and then return and love it sort of justifies that feeling, and that they haven't even seen it, they haven't watched it on TV. So in general, they take it once they play. Not I haven't seen many of them come and not enjoy the game. They loved playing the game. Some of us bigger Aussies obviously don't run through them on the first session, that's for sure. But in general, they've got harder, and now it's sort of us older Aussies who want a bit of a retirement game are running scared on the field because they're really starting to hit us hard. And the passion, and in this quarantine, they're just bugging us. Give us the links to the AFL website. Give us the links to what games we should be watching, and it's been really rewarding, like really rewarding.
Excellent.
yeah, I was thinking that, again, even if a country or people aren't used to a contact sport, if they're keen, if they're willing to learn, and if they can run, they're halfway there already. So I reckon you guys are in a pretty good spot in terms of making them full footy addicts, as I say. So that's awesome.
Yeah, look, it's one of the things too. We had to really, like Ben said, it's a soccer fanatic country, and you're never going to take that away. No sport's ever going to succeed or supersede soccer in this country. So we had to look at what can we offer these kids to keep coming down and keep playing. And the best part about, I guess, being the only football team in a country is we effectively represent Colombia in Aussie Rules footy. So we gave a lot of these kids who are probably, a lot of them probably would be decent soccer players, and the way they move and they're athletic, so they're probably pretty good. However, the chances of them succeeding up the ladder and playing high level soccer is really low because there's 40 million kids trying to play the sport in the country. So for us to give them the opportunity to effectively represent your country, be part of a national team where you're highly valued and important within the team, has been great, and I think that's been a good motivation for a good bunch of them.
Yeah, And in terms of making inroads with a contact sport in a soccer crazy environment, I mean, it's not that crazy anymore. Like a lot of people don't realize how big rugby's gotten, not just in Colombia, but Argentina is one of the best in the in one of the best in the world. And so, yeah, I think there's always fertile ground if you look for it. Like again, like you were saying, there's everyone loves soccer, but obviously not everyone's going to play at the pro level. So it's great to have that fallback option. And of course, like you said, you've got that bragging point. Oh, we're the only Aussie Rules team in the country. So why not come down?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's rugby has been I guess the inspiration for us here is that you can forge ahead and you can forge a sport into a country that 20 years ago, I doubt anybody thought Colombia would be playing rugby. So, yeah, we just looked at rugby as our guiding light, and we've got good relationships with a lot of the guys who founded the rugby in Colombia, and they've given us ideas, and we're sort of trying to follow their footsteps effectively. And they started working with certain communities, which got a foothold in the country and progressed from there. So that's kind of the blueprint we're effectively trying to follow here.
Great. As far as cultural blending goes, so you're Australian, obviously. You're playing in a South American country. How are you trying to blend cultures? What have you learned, and how have the cultures mixed from you being there, playing the sport with them, and trying to, grow that way?
Okay, it's an interesting concept of what culture blending is and cultural exchange is, and I think it's a very different thing for different people. When I first moved here, I avoided all contact with Australians because I wanted to immerse myself in Colombian culture and do all this. And effectively, when the footy club started and we started meeting regularly with a few more Aussies, you realise there are aspects to your culture that you enjoy and does relax you, and you do keeps you quite happy. So the idea of blending Colombian and Australian culture has probably been easier on the Australian side. We live obviously in their country. We get their culture. It's more, to be honest, it was more teaching Colombians to understand that sledging each other can be fun, and calling each other pretty horrible things on the footy field, and having a beer after it is completely acceptable. So, a lot of what I understand from the soccer culture in Colombia is that a lot of the teams will come together, they'll play 90 minutes of soccer, scream at each other when they make a mistake, and go home. What we've effectively done is really tried to not only build a football club but a social club and a cultural exchange between that, and teach respect and teach friendship amongst the groups. And no matter what happens on a footy field, you have a beer after it or you have a chat after it. You're still friends, and that's been really impressive watching the Colombians grow into that culture as such. And I guess on the flip side, the Australians having to learn that Colombians do it a different way, and that Colombians, what we expect from an Australian at our footy club, you can't necessarily expect from a Colombian. You can't expect them to do certain things that you'd expect an Australian to do, and that's adapting to the Colombian culture as well. And like I say, timekeeping drives me absolutely mental because I'm a very on time kind of a person. But if you let that get to you and you don't accept that that's kind of part of what Latin America is, what Colombia is, then you're not making the effort. You're not immersing yourself in that culture either. So it's a give and take. Some positives, some negatives, but in general, it's meshed really well, and I think the Colombians are receiving a lot from it.
Do Colombians like meat pies? Asking for a friend.
To be honest, I'm not sure anybody makes them in Colombia. I made one a couple of days ago. But yeah, they have the empanadas down here. It's effectively their meat.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if somebody really started a meat pie business here, I reckon Colombians would jump on board. I really do.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of following up what you were talking about with like the cultural differences, it's funny how stuff like that is because like I went to university in New Mexico, so I was exposed to a lot of the Latino culture, and yeah, it's very you know very jokey, very masculine oriented, and in their own unique way, they kind of have. Obviously, I'm speaking more like Puerto Rican, Mexican, Central American influences, but they kind of have their own, taking the piss kind of culture where, everyone gets to tease each other and, sledge each other a little bit, all in good fun. And it's funny how stuff like that can translate in ways that you wouldn't really expect because you think, oh, there's a language barrier, so they're probably not gonna exactly act like the Aussies do or whoever. So it's funny how stuff like that works, and it results, in my experience at least, it results in a lot of unexpected friendships. So
Yeah, look, it's a really good point you make, and the language barrier has been such an interesting aspect of the footy club and how we go about it. I think I mean, my Spanish is, I'm the first to admit my Spanish is pretty terrible. I'm an English teacher in Colombia, so I don't, I spend most of my day speaking English actually, and I can get by with my Spanish and it's no issues. But it's, yeah, that understanding, I'm sure a lot of the jokes that the Colombians have amongst themselves go straight over my head. And and probably a lot of the things I say to Australians go over theirs. So language has such a strong connection to culture and the way people speak to each other. And yeah, I agree. I think they're definitely got their own jokes among themselves. I don't understand them all 100%. But what is pretty unique down here is listening to a game of Aussie Rules get played and listening to it being played in Spanish is a pretty incredible sound that I 5 years ago I just wouldn't have even considered that would be an aspect of me living here. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, Paddy, it must be so fulfilling and just heartwarming, just seeing the Colombians take up the game, the passion they put into it, how much they want to learn it, and what they're just and coming back, returning to training, what they put into their into their love of the game. To speak to that, well, what do you feel are some of the key the key pieces to growing the game there, whether it be the continual games. I mean, Austin, we had a great time playing against the Bulldogs, but also just seeing Colombia and immersing ourselves in that culture. What do you feel are some of the key points there, whether it be through youth development, playing against North American teams?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it comes back to challenges, and we have so many, or we feel we have so many challenges down here. I'm sure every club in the world has multiple challenges in running. Our biggest challenge is games, effectively, and getting games. We started the local league down here 2 years ago, and it's been successful. We have 3 clubs. We play sort of a round robin competition. However, when Austin came down, it was a pretty big wake up call, especially to the Colombians who had never played competitive footy before, what real football looks like and what real teams play like. So for us, that's our real focus, is obviously recruitment and whatnot. But to recruit, I think we need to guarantee games each year and guarantee competition each year, and try and obviously get American teams to come down here and give them that experience. But the original plan this year was to do an international trip again and take Colombians with us as an incentive. Last year, we took them to Peru, which was a pretty special experience. Most of them have never been on an airplane before, and we're playing Chile in Peru. So it was a pretty special thing. The ultimate goal for us, I guess, as a sustainability and as keeping people is, to play in America every year, play in a tournament in America every year, and go down that path. Although that in itself, for Colombians and for the footy club, it's not a let's just do it kind of a thing. It's very expensive to do for Colombian people earning Colombian pesos and visas and whatnot. but the end result is that's what we want to be doing. Ideally, in the future, playing nationals every year in the States or something like that, So that's the goal. That's the goal.
I think one of the things you guys need to do is start doing a grand final party and have like a live MC who can translate the commentary into Spanish.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually, the grand final party's been pretty successful every year. Like you guys, it's at a pretty horrible time at night. But that's been pretty successful, and we do that. But I do like the idea of Spanish commentary translating. That's a really good idea. I think we might take that one up.
So, Patty, do you find that Colombia is one of the leaders in South American footy development? Have other countries kind of taken your guys' lead, and it's been more established? Do you see it spreading across the entire continent there?
I suppose credit where credit's due, and Chile, Santiago and Chile effectively started football in South America, and without them, I doubt we would exist. They made the decision to come and play us the first time,
Mhm.
but it's kind of it's a bit of a wave effect here, where, for example, when Chile started, I think 10 years ago, I'm not sure exact times, they had a mining boom in Chile, so they were full of Australians mining the country. The mining boom stopped, and all the Australians went home. So it's a bit up and down, and Colombia, we're sort of going through a down period with Australians. A lot of Australians have left in the last 1 or 2 years. Uh, so it's hard to keep a momentum up and keep that consistency and keep growing the sport. And you'd have to look at other cities in South America that could sustain, or would have enough Aussies anchored within the community to really push and grow something. We got very lucky here in Bogota that there just happened to be a group of 10 really strong, keen Aussies to create it.
Yeah, I imagine that's kind of a recurring theme throughout South America. Like there are peaks and valleys in terms of how many expats are in the country at any given time. I mean, you'd think with cities like Rio or Sao Paulo or other places where there's presumably decent sized Anglo expats that there'd be enough interest for a footy club. But you're right, sometimes it's just about luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, ours was 100% luck. We just happened to have that group of people who wanted to push something new, and really stuck together, and it just grew, and people put in the time. Whereas if you don't, for me, it feels like you'd really need a core of minimum of sort of 5 guys who are really, and girls who are really prepared to push to get something happening.
You mentioned that you've had a few Irishmen pass through the club. Is there any there's not a Gaelic club in Bogota, is there?
No, but funny enough, a few months ago, we've been in discussions with the Irish embassy here about we're going to do a international rules match against those guys. But times change pretty quickly at the moment,
Mm,
and
yeah.
so all
Yeah.
that's sort of been put on hold. But yeah, ideally, I think it's a fantastic way forward, and getting involved with the Irish as well. And I don't think there's a Gaelic club as such, but I imagine they probably have kicks in the park. I saw somebody hurling the other day in a park in Bogota,
Mm,
actually. So
wow.
yeah.
That's fantastic. So, Patty, what do you think is your biggest thing moving forward? What do you want to see going forward? What would you like to see for the future the most?
Um, Look, probably 3 years ago, the goal was to have more Colombians in our footy club than Australians, and have Colombians really running the show and really running their own league here, and doing that. And every now and again, when all the work stops and the organisation stops, and you can sit down on the grass and have a cold beer and watch Colombians go at it on a footy field, it makes it all worthwhile, and it makes you. It's really rewarding for the work you've put in. You can sit back and enjoy it. That's effectively what I want. I'm 36 this year, I think, and I want to be able to come down in 10 years' time and watch Colombia play the US in a football match on the hill and have a beer and not have to play. That's effectively. I love playing, but I don't want to be able to get a game for Colombia. I don't want to be able to be selected for some of the teams because the level's grown to a point where I don't get selected anymore. And that's my goal. A few people have other ideas of where the future lies, but for me, it's not being good enough to play for the Bulldogs first team or the national team anymore. That's pretty much where I'm at.
I mean, you can still umpire.
That'll be it, yeah. But the problem with the cultural difference is too the Colombians are starting to get a few sneaky comments at the umpires. I'm not enjoying the umpiring that much anymore.
Paddy, I love what you said there about, just that vision about, long term, being able to see the game flourish and Colombians take it up and being able to see a game versus America, or who knows, maybe a kind of a Champions League type tournament where Colombia take part. What's been the interest from Colombians to possibly go and play in Australia at an amateur level? Has there been any interest there?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of Colombians would love the opportunity to go to Australia, would love the opportunity to go to the US, study, work, and do what they can. We've been, in discussions, and there is a plan formulating to do effectively exchange programs with Australia and local organisations to study, play for a local footy team. We're sort of aiming towards mining. There are some Australian mining companies in Colombia. So the idea would be to send some Colombians over there, work, and get some Australians over here to help run Footy Colombia effectively and do that kind of exchange program. Again, that's what we want to be able to offer, and that's a recruitment tool for us, is to offer opportunities to Colombians who would never possibly get that chance in any other area.
Yeah, and in a similar way, are you guys trying to eventually make your way to the International Cup? Because obviously that would be a first if a South American team, I don't think any of them have ever been able to send a full side over there. So is that another ultimate goal in the future?
100%. Yeah, that's been a huge, focal point in the future. It's hard to pinpoint when you want to do that as such, because like I say, the Colombian peso is so poor compared to other countries that the mind-boggling cost of that is pretty daunting. But, the idea is to work on sponsors and get help doing that. But absolutely, that's the plan, to send a Colombian team to the International Cup in Australia, and we want that in the next 5 years. Definitely.
Awesome.
That'd be fantastic. Well, if you ever want to come to Denver, we will gladly host a return trip side for you guys to come over and play us again. We loved playing you guys. It was one of the greatest experiences for my club. A lot of people always talk about it. So if you ever want to come back to the States, Denver will host you.
Well, that's the idea. We do want to get to the States. We're planning this year to come to the States, find a good tournament, find a good thing where we could play a few teams, especially the teams that have come down to Colombia. And that's the plan for the future still. We've just got to wait it out and see where everything falls, I guess, in the next 12 months, like everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much, Paddy. We wish you all the best. And it seems like there's a lot of really positive developments going on in Bogota right now. And yeah, hopefully we can get you on again sometime in the near future and see how things are going.
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys, and I just want to say, any club that is interested in coming down to Colombia, contact me, contact the club. We put on a good show, and we would just love to host you down here. We're craving football down here, and you'd be more than welcome if you come down.
And you guys are on social media.
Yep.
You guys are on social media, right?
Facebook, absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet.
Great.
Nice. Second that, Paddy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paddy.
No, yeah. So the social media plug, it's just Bogota Bulldogs Australian Football Club.
Yep, Bogota Bulldogs. We've got a website, bogotabulldogs.com. Have a look, get in contact with us, and yeah, especially even if you're coming to just visit Colombia, come down for a kick. We love spreading the experience of other clubs, especially to our Colombians, and that experience is pretty cool.
Awesome.
That'd be amazing.
All right.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much, Paddy. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy.
All the best, Paddy.
Awesome, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Outside 50 is brought to you with the help of Play Aussie USA. Play Aussie is the only place in the USA you can buy the famous Sheeran football, a proud sponsor of the USAFL. Visit them at playaussie.com.